From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now! We're broadcasting live from Copenhagen. This is Climate Countdown.
This text is an extremely dangerous document for developing countries. It is a total violation of the principles of transparency and openness.
Uproar at the climate change talks here in Copenhagen. Developing nations are reacting furiously to news that the United States, Britain, and Denmark have drafted a secret climate deal that hands more power to wealthy nations and sidelines the role of the United Nations. Under the draft text, rich countries would be permitted to emit nearly twice as much as those in poor countries. We'll speak with journalist Naomi Klein, Martin Kor of South Center, and the chief climate negotiators for Bolivia and Paraguay. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We're broadcasting live from Copenhagen. Global climate talks here in Copenhagen have been shaken up with the news wealthy nations have drafted a secret agreement sidelining poorer countries and the United Nations. On Tuesday, The Guardian newspaper published details of a leaked agreement said to include the U.S., Britain, Denmark, and a handful of others. The deal lacks binding emissions cuts and would allow rich countries to pollute nearly twice as much as poorer nations by 2050. After the document was revealed, dozens of African observers at the summit staged a protest inside the conference halls. The Sudanese negotiator, Lumumba Stanislas Diaping, chair of the Group of 77 bloc of developing nations, said the proposals are unacceptable.
77 member states will not walk out of these consultations or negotiations in this late hour, because we cannot afford failure of Copenhagen. And let me just actually be very blunt. $10 billion will not buy developing countries, people, enough coffins.
We'll have more from here inside the Copenhagen summit after headlines. Senate Democrats appear to have finalized a deal on removing a government-funded public insurance option from their health care reform bill. On Tuesday, Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid said a group of 10 Democrats had reached broad agreement on a so-called compromise proposal. The plan would abandon a government-funded health plan to compete with private insurers. Instead, the Federal Office of Personnel Management would hire the insurance companies to run the health plans. Uninsured Americans between the age of 55 and 64 would also be able to obtain coverage through Medicare. Reid says he'll unveil the plan after the Congressional Budget Office analyzes its costs. The announcement came as the Senate defeated an amendment that would have added harsh anti-abortion restrictions to the health care bill. The proposal from Democratic Senator Ben Nelson of Nebraska mirrored language in the House bill that bars any woman who receives government health insurance subsidies from enrolling in an insurance plan covering abortion. The amendment failed by a margin of 54 to 45. After the vote, Nelson said he's unlikely to support the final health care reform bill with his amendment removed. As the Senate health care effort continues, single-payer advocates are planning a national day of action. That's Thursday at Senate offices nationwide. The group Mobilization for Health Care for All says it'll hold sit-ins at Senate offices in 18 cities. The sit-ins are timed to coincide with International Human Rights Day, which marks the signing of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. The declaration affirms medical care as a basic human right. A new study of health care in wealthy nations, meanwhile, says the U.S. ranks near the bottom in life expectancy, despite spending more than double the average amount in health care costs. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development says U.S. health care spending averaged over $7,000 in 2007, nearly 2.5 times the OECD average. Life expectancy was 78.1 years, putting the U.S. in 26th place out of 30 member nations. The Obama administration's reached a settlement in a long-running class action lawsuit over federal mismanagement of Native American and trusts dating back to the 19th century. On Tuesday, the Interior Department announced it would pay $3.4 billion to settle claims by more than 300,000 Native Americans for unpaid royalties on seized lands. The settlement is a fraction of the estimated $176 billion Native Americans have maintained they're owed. On Tuesday, the lead plaintiff in the suit, Eloise Cobell of the Blackfeet Nation in Montana, said it was time to reach a compromise.
Although we have reached a settlement totaling more than $3.4 billion, there is little doubt this is significantly less than the full accounting to which individual Indians are entitled. Yes, we could prolong our struggle and fight longer, and perhaps one day we would know down to the penny how much individual Indians are owed. Perhaps we could even litigate long enough to increase the settlement amount. But we are compelled to settle now by the sobering realization that our class grows smaller each year, each month, and every day as our elders die and are forever prevented from receiving their just compensation.
$0.4 billion is the largest amount Native Americans have received from the federal government to date, eclipsing all previous settlements combined. President Obama has unveiled a new round of economic stimulus proposals to address unemployment. On Tuesday, Obama called for business tax cuts, infrastructure spending, and a Cash for Caulkers program that would provide incentives for home weatherization. Obama said an anticipated lower cost of the Wall Street bailout could help fund his plan.
TARP is expected to cost the taxpayers at least $200 billion less than what was anticipated just this past summer. And the assistance to banks, once thought to cost taxpayers untold billions, is on track to actually reap billions in profits for the taxpaying public. So this gives us a chance to pay down the deficit faster than we thought possible, and to shift funds that would have gone to help the banks on Wall Street to help create jobs on Main Street.
Toll from Tuesday's multiple bombings in Baghdad has reached at least 127. More than 500 people were also wounded in what was one of the worst attacks to hit Iraq this year. At the United Nations, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon condemned the bombings.
I'm very shocked, and I condemn in the strongest terms possible. This is just unacceptable. The horrendous terrorist bombing against the civilians. This must be stopped.
Oh, good. Okay. It's as Iraqi civilians continue to endure deadly attacks, the U.S. and British pre-war effort to justify the invasion and occupation of Iraq is coming under new scrutiny. A British parliamentarian is now claiming the U.S. and Britain based one of its claims about Iraq's non-existent weapons of mass destruction on the hearsay testimony of an Iraqi taxi driver. The taxi driver is said to have recounted a conversation he claimed to have overheard between Iraqi officials 2 years earlier. Citing British intelligence officials, the parliamentarian Adam Holloway says the taxi driver's claims became the basis for U.S. and British intelligence that Saddam Hussein could deploy chemical or biological weapons within 45 minutes. The Obama administration's two top military and civilian officials in Afghanistan appeared on Capitol Hill Tuesday to make the case for President Obama's escalation of the Afghan occupation and war. It was the first congressional appearance by General Stanley McChrystal and Ambassador Carl Eikenberry since Obama announced the deployment of at least 30,000 additional troops last week. A protester with the group Code Pink was removed from the hearing after holding up a sign reading, "Surge, big mistake." Eikenberry, meanwhile, addressed the controversy over his reported opposition to deploying additional troops, saying he, in fact, supported the escalation all along.
It was not a question of additional troops. It was the question, as we all had, about the number of troops. What would be the timelines for those troops? What would be the context that those troops would operate in? With that, at this point in time, as I said in my opening statement, Mr.